Our class tonight is actually, someone was asking earlier today what the topic is, and I was saying that it's on the weekly Torah portion. It's actually on, it's the time of the year as well as the Torah portion. And as always, I feel like it is extremely timely to what we are going through right now. So I'm not sure if you know, we're in a time period right now, which is called the 3 weeks. And it's the 3 weeks leading up to the 9th of Av, Tisha B'Av, which is when both of our temples were destroyed. And actually the absolutely saddest day on the Jewish calendar. And what's really interesting is that I think it's kind of unusual that the holiday, the Jewish holiday coming up, really coincides also with what we're reading in the Torah portion. So it was only a few weeks ago where we read of the spies, and for those of you that are keeping up with the Torah portion and reading it in English, on your own, it was just a few weeks ago when the Jewish people are in the desert, and they are told that they are going to be entering the land, and they're going to have to fight these, all the people in the Holy Land in order to get in. And they say, okay, we want to send spies so that we will know the best route. We know the best way to go about it. And sure enough, that's what happens. Moshe sends the spies, and we know that it doesn't go down too well. The spies come back, and they put the fear of God into the people, and they start telling them stories of what is going on in the land of Israel, and they start to panic, and they go crazy. They get so scared, and they start to cry. And they come to Moshe and they say, what are you doing? You took us out of Egypt so that we should die here. And they say this a number of times throughout. They seem to complain quite a bit, and they are so upset that now they are going to die at the hands of these giants and these mighty people in the land of Israel. And they are beside themselves, and they start to cry. And it's very, very interesting. The Talmud says about this time when the Jewish people were crying, the Talmud says, you know which day this was? You know which day on the calendar it was? It was the 9th of Av. It was Tisha B'Av, this day when the Jewish people were crying. And God says, and tell me if this sounds familiar, you cried for no reason, I'm going to give you something to cry about, right? And God says, you cried for nothing on the 9th of Av. Let me tell you what's going to happen on the 9th of Av. I am going to give you very good reason to cry for all generations to come. Now, let me ask you, if your child comes to you and is in hysterics, is crying for nothing, trust me, it happens all the time. And I'm sure you've all experienced it, right? Where there's a child that is crying for absolutely no reason. They don't even know why they're crying. Actually, I remember doing that as a teenager myself. I actually remember sobbing and my parents coming to me, what happened? I'm like, I don't know why I'm crying. I remember that. My mother was like, she'll deal with it. My father had no clue what to do. He thought I was like off my rocker. I remember that so clearly. And you know what? And it happens with our kids all the time. And I know I need to say to David, he's just tired. They're just hungry. They're just, cranky. Just hug them. Just, they just need a little bit of attention. Which parent says, oh, you're crying for no reason? Okay, let me beat you up a little bit so you'll be crying. You'll actually be crying for a reason, right? Which parent actually says, okay, let me give you a really good reason to cry and then actually go ahead and do something really, really terrible to their child so that they actually cry? I mean, that sounds a bit crazy, don't you think? I think it sounds a little bit exaggerated. It's a little bit out there for any parent to do that to their child, but especially when we're talking about a loving God, a God that we know loves the Jewish people, like his only child that was born at an elderly age, right? Like the most you possibly can. Why would a loving God do that? Say, okay, I'm going to give you a really, really good reason. And let me tell you, the times of the destruction of the temple was quite violent, and it was quite severe. And if you actually read what went on, if you read in the Megillah, which I actually don't recommend it because it is so gruesome, I cannot follow along in the English because it is so awful when you hear what the Jewish people actually went through during that time. So to think that, like, okay, they cried and now God is punishing them in such a terribly gruesome way is very, very hard to actually relate to and to comprehend. But actually, in reality, it wasn't a punishment. It was not a punishment. It wasn't because they cried, so the Jewish people were punished, and therefore they got what they got, the 9th of Av and the destruction of the temple and all that came with it. But the Talmud actually explains the concept of learned hopelessness. What happens is, look at this people, look at the generation, the people entering Israel. They were living in a reality of miracles. If you were to ask these people, what did you have for breakfast this morning? They would say, oh, it was the manna that dropped from heaven. If you were to ask them, what did you drink this afternoon when you were thirsty? Oh, we have this rolling rock, the well of Miriam that we drink water from. It was only not long before that they left Egypt with the 10 plagues, with the crossing of the Red Sea, of the dead. We are talking about people that are living in a reality of miracles. They see God on a daily basis. They were the last people in the world that you should expect to react this way. God just did so many miracles until now. He'll keep doing miracles. No big deal for us to go in. So a country full of giants, that's what we're scared of? We've seen much worse. We can overcome this. We overcame much, much more than this. And this is the destructive nature of fear. This is what fear can do to us. That as soon as we are fearful, as soon as we are afraid, as soon as we let go of that trust in God, it overcomes us. And not that we are punished, but what happens is that as soon as we allow fear to enter into our beings, we actually make it a reality. It becomes a reality because what reality is the sum total of what we believe. If we believe we can do something or we believe we cannot do something, we will be right. Whichever one it is, we will be right. Because it is whatever we put into our minds that actually becomes the reality. And even a step further is, we just read in last week's Haftorah, where Jeremiah, Yirmiyahu, is instructed to go and tell the Jewish people what is going to happen. He actually tells of the destruction. And God says to him, do not fear and do not be afraid and do not be fearful. Because what happens is that as soon as you are afraid, as soon as you are fearful, you lose that shield, that protective shield of God. You lose that protection. And this is why you might know that the Jewish soldiers were actually not allowed to be afraid. If you were afraid to serve in the army, they were not allowed to go to battle. They were not allowed to be afraid, because the minute you are afraid, you lose that protective shield. And now I want to go just a little bit deeper into, we're going to just talk a little bit about, a little bit Kabbalistic here. So hang in there with me. So for those of you that have learned a little bit of Tanya or any of the Kabbalah, you'll know that there are 10 sefirot. There are 10 attributes. What are they? We're Chabad, right? There is conception. Chachma is conception. Bina is understanding. Da'at is application. And then we have the 7 attributes, which are love, discipline, empathy. We have chesed, gvura, tiferet. Netzach is victory. Hod is gratitude and humility. Yesod is bonding. And we have Netzach, Hod, Yesod. And the final one, the 10th one, is called Malchus, also referred to as character or dignity. The 9th of Av is the 9th day of the month. The day of the destruction of the temples is the 9th day of the month. It is lacking the 10th attribute. The 10th attribute, which is the sense of self. The attribute of I am. The attribute of I matter. As soon as we lose this attribute, as soon as we forget that we are on a mission from God, we are here on this earth for a very specific mission. We are here with a soul that is a piece of God. We are an emissary of God to fulfill this mission. And we know that an emissary, the Talmud says, an emissary is like the messenger himself. We are literally like God himself. We are that important. We are that special. We are that holy. But the moment that we lose that, the moment that we don't feel like we matter, the moment that we lose that self is where we fall into despair, into destruction, into negativity. Jews are not unknown, let's say, for their negativity. You know, like the waiter who comes to the Jewish patrons and says, in the kosher restaurants, and says, "Is anything okay?" Right? We are known to have our complaints, but we have to remember that this sense of self, the sense of identity, the sense of I matter is crucial, is absolutely crucial to our well-being. And not only that, but as soon as we lose that, as soon as we feel like I don't deserve a good life, I don't deserve nachas from my children, I don't deserve to, or I had a terrible childhood, I had trauma in my life, I didn't have the right Jewish upbringing in order for me to live my best Jewish life. I don't have the right tools. I don't read Hebrew well enough as I should. There are so many excuses. You know them better than me. So many excuses that we give ourselves that hinder us from living our best lives. But the message that we learn from this story, the message we learned from what happened here with the Jewish people, is that the moment we allow self-doubt to enter is the moment that it will come true. It's the moment that it will actually take a hold of ourselves. And I want to read to you a really, really beautiful quote by Marianne Williamson, who was actually a candidate for president not long ago, a brilliant woman. And she wrote this, which I think is so beautiful and so practical, and I wanted to share it with you. She says, Our deepest fear is not that we are inadequate. Our deepest fear is that we are powerful beyond measure. It is our light, not our darkness, that most frightens us. We ask ourselves, who am I to be brilliant, gorgeous, talented, and fabulous? Actually, who are you not to be? You are a child of God. Your playing small does not serve the world. There is nothing enlightened about shrinking so that other people will not feel insecure around you. We are all meant to shine as children do. We were born to make manifest the glory of God that is within us. She's actually Jewish. It is not just in some of us, it is in everyone. And as we let our own light shine, we unconsciously give others permission to do the same. As we are liberated from our own fear, our presence automatically liberates others. And I think that that is just absolutely magnificent. And I want to share another really, I think, mind-blowing story that happened in the 1900s. There was something called the Black Death of childbed. Black Death of childbed. And it was in the late 1800s where many, many, many women were dying of childbirth. It was as high as like 50, 60, 70% in some areas in Britain. Women were dying in childbirth and they could not figure out what was the cause. They just couldn't figure out what was going on. And so there were these two doctors who decided they were going to go and just survey everything that was going on. They were just going to walk in to the maternity ward and just observe every single minute that was happening and seeing what could be causing this. One, I actually want to tell you their names. Where did I actually have it here on my phone? I wrote it down here. There was Ignis Semmelweis and Oliver Wendell Holmes. So this Ignis Semmelweis observed something very, very interesting. The doctors who were so concerned about the well-being of their patients would go to the morgue, the women who died, to do autopsies, see what it was that was causing it. And then they went straight from the morgue to the maternity ward to deliver the babies. And what was happening was they weren't washing their hands. And so this Ignis said, guess what, doctors? You are the ones who are trying to save these women's lives. You are actually the ones causing their deaths because of poor hygiene, because you are going from dead women to women giving birth, and you are actually causing them to die. And guess what? They put this man into a mental asylum. They thought he was crazy. They made fun of him. And it wasn't for another 30 years that they realized that what he said was actually true. And there are so many things that we can learn from this story. But to me, what's the most eye-opening is how these were doctors who were trying to help their patients. They truly cared about their patients. They were doing everything in their power to help these women live. Yet, they were the cause of their death. They were the ones, it was they themselves who were killing these women. How often do we survey the scene around us? How often are we looking at what's going on around us and putting the blame on so many different things when we don't realize that, guess what? The power is in our own hands. It's in our own hands to make a change. It's in our own hands to, as Marianne says, I love how she says, as we are liberated from our own fear, our presence automatically liberates others. How incredible is that? How incredible is that? You know, because sometimes we feel like we want to change the whole world. I know for myself, I always have these big ideas of what I'm going to do to change the world. You know what? Start with yourself. And right now, if there is anything going on in our society, it is fear. There is so much fear. So much fear. And while, of course, it's important that we take all necessary precautions and take care of ourselves, it is our duty to take care of ourselves. We have to put our health first. We have to make sure that we are taking care of ourselves. But we cannot be afraid. We cannot live in fear, because what happens when we have fear is that it is a prophecy that we actually make come true. We are the prophets of our own fate, of our own fate. And as long as we live in fear, you will have reasons to fear. You know, it's amazing. I even see like certain kids of mine, when they're in a bad mood, when they're crying, when something's going wrong, oh my goodness, do things go wrong. They're the ones that get bitten by the mosquito. They're the ones that trip on the scooter that they didn't notice. They're the ones that miss out on the treat. When you're in that frame of mind, it finds you. It finds you. And that's why it is important to always remember that our lives are in God's hands. We are in good hands. It's gonna be good. We have to do our part. Absolutely. We can't rely on miracles. We can't say, oh, I'm just gonna go walk into the lion's den, I'm gonna rely on miracles. Of course not. We have to do our part. But we cannot live in fear. We cannot be afraid of what tomorrow is gonna bring, of what's gonna happen. If this, we just have to let go and have to let God and realize that everything comes from him. And therefore, what happened, going back to our story with the Jewish people and the spies, is that were they punished? Were they punished for crying? No, they weren't punished. It wasn't like God said, okay, you cried and now, you know, here's something real to cry about. No. But as soon as you cried and you let that fear creep in, guess what? You cried for no reason. You were fearful for no reason. You're going to end up having good reason for having that fear. Because as I said, because we are the prophets of our own fate. So that concludes that. I will open up the floor. I always love hearing your comments.